So now the Democrats are split 3 ways. And they look really vulnerable. So all the Republicans have to do, they believe, is just send somebody out there who won't screw up. Remember, Wilson was a little bit like this in 1912 when the Republicans were split with Theodore Roosevelt. Lincoln was like this when the Democrats were split back in 1860. What a great advantage. So the Republicans, and this in a way was kind of a coup too, they nominated the same man who lost to Roosevelt in 44, the governor of New York, Thomas Dewey, who was a very taciturn, dour man who they kind of mocked him for looking like the little man on the wedding cake. He was what they called a liberal Republican. He was liberal foreign policy, and he accepted the New Deal. Conservatives, conservative Republicans, both foreign policy and wanted trickle down. So conservative Republicans hated him. Were furious. Were furious, and that Dewey was picked and not their hero. They wanted Robert Taft, William Howard Taft's son. Same thing would happen in 52. And this is going to begin this anti-New Deal, rabidly anti-communist, conservative wing of the Republican Party that they would have their own coup and begin to take over the Republicans in 1964 with everybody's favorite presidential candidate, AUH2O. And so, with that, Thomas, AUH2O, gold, water. Get it? All right, so, yeah, Barry Goldwater. And eventually conservative Republicans would soon dominate the Republican Party, and now they are the Republican Party. They control it. And so,
was there anything like the Tea Party back then?
Oh yeah, they called them the John Birch Society. We'll talk a little bit about them in the 60s, but rabidly anti. They were big supporters of Goldwater, so they were always made up a big percentage of the Republican Party. And so the Tea Party in reality is just the same thing. The Tea Party is just that same wing of the Republican Party with a different name.
Do they really use that as a campaign slogan?
Why is it horrible? Are you afraid of science? All right, so all Thomas Dewey had to do, they believe, is just show up. Make no mistakes. So he ran an uncampaign. Literally did nothing. A lot of conservative Republicans said, start saying Truman sought on communism. But Dewey didn't see it. He didn't feel he had to. In fact, political polling was brand new. Gallup, who still does polling, did a poll at the end of September. It was their last poll. It took a lot longer than to do polls, not like today. And their poll had Truman losing badly. Everybody thought Truman was going to lose. Everybody. Except Truman. Truman understood something. And what Truman understood was this. The people liked the New Deal. A lot. And he had to remind them why there was the New Deal. He had to remind them why there was Social Security. He had to remind them of the Wagner Act. And so what he did is he ran the last of the old-time campaigns. He rode his presidential train. It was FDR's old train. It was called the Ferdinand Magellan. I just think that's a great name. And rode that all over the country, including Montana. And every town he would get off, he would go to the back of the train, give an impromptu speech. He couldn't give a good speech. You're just this very set speech. But he could give this impromptu, rip-roaring, enthusiastic speech. And he would always just hammer the Republicans, say that they're the malefactors of wealth. They want to go, malefactor means essentially the evildoers of wealth. They want to go back to what caused the Depression. They want to take away all that you gained after World War II and the Great Depression. Take away your Social Security. Take away your high pay. And they did nothing. He called them the do-nothing Republican Congress. And somebody in the audience would always yell, "Give them hell, Harry." And he would say, "If you send me back, I'll give them hell." And everybody would cheer. And it worked. It worked like a silent campaign. Nobody realized it. Everyone just assumed Truman's going to lose. The Chicago Tribune, the day of the election, already printed their headline for the next day. They were a Republican leading newspaper, and it said, Dewey defeats Truman. And they printed a million copies. Truman would not only win the greatest political upset in American history, he won a big victory. And so did the Democrats. The Republicans were swept out of Congress. The Democrats gained seats all over in every state, and Truman won a big victory. The greatest political upset in history, because nobody expected it. Now, looking back, it wasn't an upset. People loved the New Deal. And they saw him as the fair deal successor of the New Deal.
Was the poll that favored Dewey? Was that just because it only talked to people who were rich, basically?
It partially because of that, and partially because they just had bad sampling. They skipped areas that would have been for Truman, and he won. And conservative Republicans basically said, "Told you so. You should have ran against communism." And because he attacked the Republicans so bitterly, the gloves came off of the Republicans. And immediately, they started calling Truman and the Democratic Party soft on communism. And they attacked him and attacked him and attacked him. And the fair deal, virtually none of it passed. He didn't get any of it. Now, the New Deal remained. That was not removed. But education never happened. Still really hasn't happened. Little bits on the edge, but for the most part, we have a very weird system. Healthcare, boy, do we have a weird system of healthcare. We have a very hackneyed system where the United States pays twice what the rest of the industrialized, or twice any other country in the industrialized world, and gets worse results. So it's an interesting system we have. And civil rights would not happen for another 15 years. Poverty, that's going up again, so that obviously has never been resolved. And so with this, the fair deal fell apart. But what really hit, though, what really hit Truman hard was just the racism of it. Conservative Democrats scuttled healthcare. It could have passed health insurance. Why? Don't want blacks in the same hospitals as whites. That's why there was no health insurance. Now, you did make an argument that's not the best healthcare system, and there's all kinds of arguments that way. But it is pretty sad when that is the reason why there wasn't that. And so, and I know it might seem like a long time ago, it's not. It really isn't. But in 1949, what also really hurt Truman were two shocks. Two horrific shocks. Now, the Berlin airlift was just ending, and he was kind of riding the wave. I got the, we stood down Stalin. And then two things happened that shook the United States to its very core and would trigger the second Red Scare and McCarthyism. Also trigger the Korean War. The first one, September 1949, Joe won. What's Joe won? This is what the U.S. code name is. Yeah, the Russian atomic bomb. Yeah, that was the exact copy of Trinity. Exact copy. Yeah, an American reconnaissance plane was flying high over the New Mexico desert. Basically, the U.S. had been exploding atomic bombs in the Pacific, blowing up islands. Kind of did work on testing atomic bombs, when in reality was to intimidate the Soviets. In fact, one test in 1946 was so famous. It was the first real big test after the war. They blew up an island. Big news that a French designer named his new fashion craze after this island. Anybody know? It was called Bikini Atoll. No, atoll. The atoll, but yeah, because what does bikini even mean? It's an island named after an atomic test. That's where, and so he named it the Bikini after that.
And SpongeBob probably came out of it.
And
That's why they all.
I actually know nothing about that. SpongeBob.
No,
It's a cartoon, right?
Basically, it's like these sponge and weird creatures live at the bottom of the ocean, but they don't have a bikini bottom, so like it's hinting that they're all like weirdly radioactive.
And that must be where it came from. The only thing I know about SpongeBob is that one time Mr. Carter said, it's actually not bad. because he was watching it with his kids. And I just like, I still have no idea.
I think it's
my dad will
never let my children watch it.
I bet your children. Okay, so someday down the road. All right, so Joe won. And the U.S. discovered Joe 1, and the thing was now the nuclear monopoly was gone. The United States assumption was it wouldn't be to the end of the 1950s until they'd have a bomb, and boom, they have a bomb. And now our nuclear monopoly is over. This is huge, huge, because the assumption was, sure, the Red Army is great, but we have the nuclear bomb. Now, visions of fleets of atomic or Soviet bombers flying over the Arctic, raining death on American cities. Literal panic. Yeah.
How easy was it at this time to actually make like an atomic bomb?
It was incredibly difficult as it is today.
Right, so like you couldn't just build a fleet of atomic bombs like just.
No, it's going to take a long time to do this. So, but it doesn't matter. People didn't know that. All they knew is now they must be ready to bomb our cities.
How did they get their uranium?
Mind it. Yeah, the Soviet Union has the most, or now Russia has the most uranium in the world, uranium-238, and South Africa has the second most. There's about 50 years left of uranium at the current rate they're using. Yeah.
But we just
Did, once we figured out that they had a bomb, did we try and get them to, disarm or anything like that?
Actually, there was talk. Maybe we had to get together for arms control talks. Arms control talk? You must be what?
No, but I mean, even us saying, okay, we have bombs now. It's going to take you guys a while to get enough.
Yeah.
To do anything, we'll bomb you if you start building.
Oh yeah, some people said that. Let's go to war. Now it's time to go to war.
Oh. And what was the response?
Well, we almost did it.
How many?
Very conservative ones believe that. In fact, that was one of the arguments to do it in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Hey, we still have a lot more missiles to do. Let's do it right now. Let's do it right now. Kind of the same thing that Germany said in 1914. Let's do it right now. And once again, we wouldn't have to worry about that big timeline I gave you, right? That list of terms. What's that?
How many nuclear weapons did the United States and USSR have? Like, what was the max?
The United States had about 40,000 atomic bombs, and the Soviets had about 65,000.
Now we have the most though, don't we?
Hmm?
Supposedly we have the most.
Oh yeah.
How many times, because they measure that in destruction
Many
of the
times.
world over time.
Oh.
Like,
How long does it take to make a nuclear missile now?
Too many. Okay. Not they're easy to make. All right. So Joe 1. Here's the deal. Klaus Fuchs. Klaus Fuchs was a Bulgarian physicist who fled fascism. He went to Britain before World War II. Churchill farmed out their physicists to Los Alamos to work on the atomic bomb there, with the idea being they would come back to Britain after the war and work on the British atomic bomb, which Britain would explode a couple of years later. So Fuchs was back in Britain when it was discovered by American intelligence, just as Joe 1 was exploded, that he was sending word out from Los Alamos to Soviet intelligence, the NKVD, and gave them the plans for the implosion bomb. Klaus Fuchs. There's a couple other scientists, but Fuchs was the most famous one. It's Fuchs. The United States broke the Soviet wartime code, and so they were reading these messages in 1948-49, back from the World War II, and they discovered his name and the plans for the bombs. Now, the U.S. didn't want to show how we got the information, and they went to the British, who were highly embarrassed. Klaus Fuchs admitted it, and they had a half-day trial and convicted him of espionage in 20 years. Couple things about this. He got 20 years in prison. 20 years in prison. Fuchs was the worst type of spy. He was a true believer. The one I got caught. Huh? The one I got caught. He was a true believer. He didn't do it for money. He did it because he sincerely believed that Stalin was creating a workers' paradise, and the U.S. is going to become fascist. He's saving the world from fascism. That spy is doing it for money. I'm not saying they're not bad, but they can be turned immediately. Fuchs, that's why he believed it. Be careful spelling his name, obviously. I must mention that. And here's the other thing. He's a spy. There was a spy. I don't get it. There was a spy in the United States, passing secrets. If there's one spy, how many spies might there be? One of the great tenets of total war, and this idea is that there's spies everywhere, and now we know there's spies. And there became a big witch hunt to find all these communists. There must be communists. That's why there are all these spies. And I kind of went back. That's why Yalta happened. That's why all these things happen, because there's communists.
So could being like communist make you a spy on that?
Yes. Yes. If you're a communist or someone who dabbled in communism, you're kind of a fellow traveler, they call them, you must be a communist. You must be a spy and a traitor.
So like you turn to the Espionage Act for just
And so, two people, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg were arrested for espionage soon after this. Now, Julius almost certainly was sending information. We know he was, we don't know what extent, how dangerous it was. He was a communist, he sent spies. But in this just tear that happened after Joe won, both would not only be convicted of espionage, both would be executed, the first time in peacetime. For some, a woman was executed for espionage. She's not being arrested for sabotage. And how much proof did it have on her? None. It's almost certain that she might have known Julius was up to something, but that's it. She was not a spy. But that should give you an idea how scary these times were. And so, Joe won, now they're coming. Next, the biggest country in the world is going to become communist. 1949, November. It was so bad they could hardly make a 4 and a 9 anymore. That's how bad people were afraid. Does that make any sense? What I just said, how bad people were afraid? Yeah, just go with me on that one. I'm too scared to think. China. There had been a civil war in China. Well, basically since 1911, but since 1930, there was a civil war between the communists and the not communists, who were just kind of a hodgepodge of warlords and militarists and these kind of things. The United States, basically FDR, picked the leading warlord, is the only way to describe it, and he's what we call the nationalist, or the Kuomintang. The man was Chiang Kai-shek, and he was a warlord. He kind of wanted a Republican form of government, but he was a dictator, a pretty nasty dictator, Chiang Kai-shek. Now, Chiang Kai-shek had received millions of dollars of American aid to fight the communists and the Japanese, which he did neither. But he got really rich. Weird, huh? I wonder how that happened. The communists were led by Mao Zedong. He was a guerrilla leader. He was the real deal. And he had this kind of agrarian version of communism, which was actually not very much like Marx. Can you read it okay? Mao and then Zedong. Z-E-D-O-N-G. And not only did he keep the communists fighting, during World War II, he fought the Japanese. While Chiang Kai-shek actually just marshaled his forces for the Civil War afterwards. And U.S. intelligence agents said, right after the war, we should be supporting Mao. He's the real deal. Not Chiang, but because of communism, we supported Chiang Kai-shek. And so after the war, continued to pump in money. By the way, almost the exact same thing would happen in Vietnam, where they'd say, we ought to be supporting Ho Chi Minh, but we gave money to the French to regain their colony, leading to the Vietnam War. What?
You said re-get.
Did I say re-get? Like I said, I'm too scared. So, in 1949, it all fell apart for Chiang Kai-shek. Even though he had 10 times the number of troops of the communists, his troops were poorly paid, horrifically led, and his army just dissolved. And many of them joined the Red Army, joined the communists. And it happened just like this. And Truman, going into the fall of 1949, people are saying, we got to get involved. In fact, some people were saying we should use the atomic bomb to stop Mao Zedong. Wow. Truman said no. And in November, it just collapsed. Mass panic. The nationalists and Chiang Kai-shek fled. The communists won. Now, a couple things about this. First off, if the communists won, who's really leading Mao Zedong according to Truman Doctrine thinking?
Stalin.
Stalin. So Stalin just won a big victory. And so, if Stalin won, then the cry was, who lost China? And that's when they started saying, who lost China? And it was who? Truman and what political party? The Democrats. Truman and the Democrats. So even though the Democratic Party had just won a resounding victory, and the Democratic Party was, if you just ask people, was bigger than the Republicans, they would be on the defensive and they never recovered. How do you defend yourself from, you lost China? Because you say something logical like, we didn't really have China to lose. And what are you immediately called? A communist. But I'm not a communist. That's what a communist would say. I mean, where do you go from this? And the Democrats never recovered. But trust me, every Democrat from then on, they don't want to be blamed for the same thing. You think Truman's going to want this again? So when a communist country attacks another one, and let's say a peninsula that most Americans hadn't even heard of, called Korea, I think Truman's going to let that happen again, and so on down the road. And so, this will be huge. Who lost China? And what did this become? In the US, we simply started calling it Red China. It's Red China, aka Bad China. They're evil. It's actually the People's Republic of China, or the PRC. Still is. Even though they still claim to be communist. They're closer to fascism, but what the heck? I don't know why I said what the heck. What the heck? It's only a couple billion people. That's what we call hyperbole. How many billion is it? Yeah, there's going to be more. They're getting rid of the 2 or the 1 child rule because it's a disaster.
They're getting rid of that?
They have to. It's a disaster.
Why? What's happening?
A lot of boys. It's becoming a demographic disaster. Back to this. So,
But I mean, since there is a lot of boys 20 years down the road, that won't be much.
it's a demographic disaster. Chiang Kai-shek, where did he go? They fled to the former Japanese colony of Formosa, took it over, basically enslaved the people who lived there, and became nationalist China, aka good China. There's going to be 2 Chinas. There are still 2 Chinas to this day. 2 Chinas. Red China, or People's Republic of China, and nationalist China. But what do we call nationalist China? Taiwan. Taiwan is nationalist China. Chiang Kai-shek would be dictator there until 1974. They are now a democracy, but the United States does not recognize Taiwan as a country. Taiwan is China, and there's already a China. So up till 1979, the U.S. recognized Taiwan as China. In fact, refused to let China in the United Nations or the National Security Council. And in 1979, we switched. And now the United States recognizes the People's Republic. And Taiwan is technically not recognized or in the UN. They're technically not considered a country by the United States. Because China won't allow it. China will not allow it. Because they claim they're part of one big China. And so when there's talk about where Taiwan is basically said, okay, we accept it now, we're Taiwan. China won't let that happen.
Is there a lot of money or resources?
Taiwan is a wealthy country, yeah. But a lot of it is just nationalism.
Functionally, though, I mean, they're
Oh, yeah. The United States has a consulate there, but not an embassy, because it's not an independent country. That's really weird.
So they don't militarily or economically aren't tied to China.
No, they are completely independent. They have a pretty powerful military.
What's the situation with Hong Kong? Because isn't it kind of
Another story, not now. All right, so with these two things, the Cold War became real. It looked like the Soviets are winning. And so you have Yalta, and you have all of these things. And it's no coincidence, right after this, it's already happening, but we have the second Red Scare. Or, who is the senator from Wisconsin? Tail Gunner Joe. Joe McCarthy and McCarthyism. He would personify this Red Scare, playing on people's fears. So we're going to watch a little bit of a clip from a series at the History Channel a little while ago called The 50s. It was back when the History Channel used to have something weird called History. And I think it's the best series they've ever done. It's fantastic. And I've lost it. Where'd it go? Give me 1 sec. Okay, it's called The 50s, and it is just a fantastic series. That's McCarthy. And this is the one on the Cold War. So it's talking about all these things happening in the first part, but then it starts with Joe McCarthy.
Come on, baby, while the trail is on. Come on, baby, let's have some fun. Come on, baby.
They did you hear?
One communist on the faculty
This?
of one university is one communist too many. One communist among the American advisors at Yalta was one communist too many.
Joseph R. McCarthy liked to call himself Tail Gunner Joe, although he had only sat behind a tail gun as a publicity stunt. For 4 brutal years, the junior senator from Wisconsin reigned as the country's self-appointed commie hunter supreme.
So people start believing
Joe
communists
McCarthy
going on.
was a black-jowled, scowling, kind of sinister-looking person with a 5 o'clock shadow and a lumbering gait.
So it looks like just like any other guy.
And yet those who got to know him found him to be gregarious. He had the sort of the appeal of a tramp dog wagging its tail.
Joe McCarthy had little to show for his first 4 years in Washington. A group of newspaper correspondents named him the worst member of the United States Senate.
That's
With
saying-
re-election approaching, he was a candidate desperate for an issue. On February 9th, 1950, McCarthy arrived in Wheeling, West Virginia to give a Lincoln Day speech to the local Republican Women's Club. He told his audience that there were 205 communists in the State Department controlling American foreign policy.
So, February 1950, he went to Wheeling, West Virginia. This is, politicians do this sort of thing. It's right after Berlin Airlift, Truman Doctrine, but then right after Joe won in China. People are on edge, fear of communism, communist spies. Klaus Fuchs has already been mentioned. The Rosenbergs arrested, and now there are 205 communists in the State Department. People believe it. How did he get this number?
It was a blatant lie.
Willard Edwards of the Chicago Tribune later said it was really a throwaway because if McCarthy had thought it was going to be a big speech, A, he wouldn't have given it in Wheeling, West Virginia, and B, he would have brought a bunch of reporters down who were right-wing reporters who were pals of his. So it was really a throwaway, but there was the charge.
The senator's accusations were published by newspapers across the country.
And their words lie.
McCarthy, elated by the attention, continued his speaking tour in Reno, Nevada, where Frank McCullough, a young reporter for the Reno Gazette, was sent to meet him.
Came down off the plane, made clear that he'd known us for 50 years. We walked away from the plane with his arms around both our shoulders. We walked down a Reno street, again with his arm about our shoulders. And he discovered in the process of that walk that I'd been a Marine, and that delighted him. We became even closer buddies. Instinctively, socially, for a U.S. Senator to treat a Bush League reporter like that is not, it isn't within the framework, and it made me very uneasy.
McCarthy was as easy with journalists as he was loose with the truth. In a subsequent radio interview, the number of communists in the State Department dwindled from 205 to 57.
We had the message from AP in which I think they quoted him as saying that he had in his hand a list of 205, and the story said communists, flatly, unequivocally. We began to try to examine him about, or question him about, why did you say 205 before and 57 now? I'll be honest with you, I don't remember what the answer was. It was a long argument, and we didn't get anywhere with it. And finally, it got to the point where at the end we were challenging him to produce this list of 57. He went through a great routine. He looked through his pockets, he looked in his briefcase, and he finally pronounced he'd lost it.
I remember when he came back from that Wheeling, West Virginia speech,